Okay, today is December 28th, 2022, and I'm doing this recording because I do not want to forget about this. But recently I figured out that Jeff Burks, who has many different names in Hollywood and the media, and probably in politics too, Jeff Burks is also Rob Zombie. So Rob Zombie, I don't know if he supposedly plays an instrument or not. Many times these guys play air guitar. They give them a guitar, and when they're in concert and they just kind of run around the stage holding the guitar, or they pretend they play the guitar and they don't really. So either way, it's an act. Many times the music is recorded and then it's played over the speakers before these Rob Zombie bands get up on stage. So as unusual as this may sound, there has been a huge amount of anger being projected to me through the MK Ultra radio frequency technology that they've been using against me earnestly since 2010. And so I've gotten pretty adept, I've gotten pretty good at recognizing who is on the other end of these radio frequency connections. And quite often it is this character known as Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie. So I was never someone who got into Rob Zombie. I think they would play Rob Zombie videos real late at night on MTV. If you happen to stay up to like 2 or 3 in the morning, they would have Rob Zombie videos on MTV. And as far as I remember, the videos were very disturbed in that they would play like a kaleidoscope of these weird kind of primitive cartoons. And the primitive cartoons would be like, consist of like things splatting or breaking open, and other figures like emerging from it, like skeletons or creatures. And it just suggested somebody with psychological problems. The artwork wasn't good, and the cartoons were a kaleidoscope of images that were happening very quickly so that you really couldn't make out what they were. It was just a blur of primitive and disgusting figures. And it was along the lines of something like The Simpsons or Beavis and Butthead. So it was kind of a primitive and disgusting art in the form of cartoons. And then Rob Zombie would wear these most likely wigs that looked like a mess of dreadlocks. And he would wear big sunglasses to hide his face. And oftentimes he would paint his face white, or he would like cake mud, like white mud or something, on his face so that you really couldn't tell who he was or see his features. And he would wear these giant like Oakley sunglasses and maybe a big cowboy hat. So you really could not make out who he was. His identity or his features would be obscured. So I'm sure any number of people could put on this Rob Zombie costume and portray themselves as Rob Zombie. But years later, in 2022, when you do searches for Rob Zombie on the internet, and there are interviews with him, and there are photographs of him, he is identified to be a Jeff Burks who lived in New Milford, Connecticut. So I live right on the border of Brookfield and New Milford, Connecticut, in a place called the Candlewood Lake Club. My parents got divorced, and this was my stepfather's summer house. We moved into my stepfather's summer house. So Rob Zombie lived right on the lake road, right in front of the water, right in front of Candlewood Lake, in a pretty nice house. It was a very upscale house. It was more modern than the house I moved into after my parents were divorced. Our house was pretty old. His house was brand new, right in front of the lake. Our house was kind of set back from the lake. You had a view of the lake, but it was set back from the lake more. This guy had a house right on the lake. So Rob Zombie is an act. I doubt this guy even plays guitar. Maybe one of the Rob Zombies plays guitar. Maybe if it's very important to show Rob Zombie playing a guitar solo up on stage that they want to put on MTV or some other show, all they'll do is have a look-alike who plays guitar put on a Rob Zombie disguise and get up on stage and play guitar, and you really can't tell who he is because you have these sunglasses on and this big wig and this big dreadlock wig and this weird cowboy hat and maybe even his face painted white. So it could be anybody. But recently, when they want to have Rob Zombie appear on the Joe Rogan show or be interviewed about his upcoming idea for a new movie of his, they're going to have somebody like Jeff Burks, who is a professional actor, represent Rob Zombie. Once again, Rob Zombie is an act. He's a commercial enterprise that was dreamed up by the establishment. So Jeff Burks is also known as the reporter Anderson Cooper. He also has a few different actor names like Logan Marshall Green. So here are a few other of Jeff Burks' identities. Identities in Hollywood, as he acts under many different names. So I don't want to get off subject, but like I said, recently I identified this actor that I knew as Jeff Burks to also be Rob Zombie. And I cannot tell you the amount of anger that has been projected at me through this radio frequency technology. And I could sense Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, at the other end of this technology. So Rob Zombie came up with a line of pretty sick movies, starting with a movie called House of a Thousand Corpses. And in that movie, it was something like it focused on a family, some sort of sick family of serial killers that were modeled after something like Charles Manson and the Charles Manson Ranch that was made known to everybody through the Manson murders that happened in the late 60s and 70s. That seems to be one of his influences. Because in these films, this weird family that likes to abduct, torture, and rape people, and then they kill them. For example, they abducted, I think, 2 or 3 teenage girls who were like cheerleaders or something. And after they tortured them and killed them, they disfigured them and made something like an artistic exhibit of them. They put their dead bodies out on display. I forget exactly how it went, but maybe they had their dead bodies in a shed on their ranch. And in another part of the movie, they had some other dead body out on display that was deformed to look like the Fishman. So they deformed somebody. They mutilated one of their victims and presented it as an exhibit called the Fishman. So this Rob Zombie and the people behind the Rob Zombie films are very sick people. They're extremely disturbed people. Jeff Burks, also known as Anderson Cooper, also known as Logan Marshall Green, and a number of other different actor names, is a very sick individual. So I would like to be the first to tell you that I've always had an interest in alternative things. When I was younger, I got a copy of the Charles Manson audio tapes. I guess they would interview him. They would often have people with access to Charlie Manson interview him on audio tape. It seemed like the establishment was very interested in having these extensive interviews with Charlie Manson that supposedly took place in different prisons. If you do a search on YouTube, I bet that you'll find something like 3 or 4 different hour to 2 hour long interviews featuring Charlie Manson, supposedly in a conference room at whatever prison he's being held at, being interviewed. So I think that that is a little bit rare. It's unusual that the prison system and the establishment will want that to happen. Usually if the establishment does not want you to hear from somebody because they are a dangerous prisoner, you're not going to hear from them. They're not going to let people into the prison to interview them if they're dangerous anti-establishment figures that the government does not want you to hear from. So that is an interesting note about Charlie Manson, is there's nothing but interviews from this guy after he's been supposedly arrested. What I have found about the establishment is a lot of these characters, like Charlie Manson, they have been controlled from the start of their criminal spree by the United States and the British military that is involved in MK Ultra mind control. And they are just so proud of their little creation, their little agent known as Charlie Manson. And after he goes on a rampage and a bunch of people end up dead and they get all this media coverage and they arrest him, they put him through a court trial. They can't wait. The establishment cannot wait to let him out of prison and give him a new identity. And he'll become an actor in Hollywood. He'll become a musician for the kids to admire. He'll become some rock star. He'll become some politician. He'll become another agent of this criminal military establishment. And these guys will constantly change their identity. They're like little clones that can morph themselves into many different identities. And just like Rob Zombie, just like Jeff Burks, Charles Manson is probably just another one of their agents that can morph into a dozen or so different people. So I would listen to Charlie Manson. They had his audio recordings for sale at a place called Trash American Style that was operated by a Malcolm Tent. And Malcolm Tent has been identified to be the actor Guy Pearce. He's an Australian actor. He was in a movie called Memento. Again, they may have 2 or 3 different men represent themselves as the actor Guy Pearce. But I'm quite sure that the Guy Pearce that acted in the movie called Memento was also known as Malcolm Tent, who owned and operated a record shop and bookstore and junk shop called Trash American Style that was located in Danbury, Connecticut. The funny thing was that it started off as a little tiny place in Brookfield, Connecticut, right near Four Corners in Brookfield, right off of Route 7, and later it moved to Mill Plain Road in Danbury, Connecticut. And that was where I saw these different audio tapes and videotapes featuring Charles Manson that he had for sale. And so I would listen to Charles Manson. And Charlie Manson would always claim that he had nothing to do with those murders. He wasn't directly involved with murdering them. Other people murdered those victims. He was innocent of those murders. He would say stuff like there was just so many people at that ranch and he had just met quite a few of those people. So he cannot take responsibility for everything those people are doing. So at that time, when I first started listening to Charlie Manson, I believed what he was saying. That made sense to me. But the reason why I was interested in Charlie Manson was because he seemed to want to tell you a little bit about what he called the underworld. And the underworld was a mix of, I guess, criminal figures and then people that were involved in the music scene, people who were rock stars, people who were actors. And as he would try to explain this, he would sound 100% crazy for the most part. But there was a way that he would speak about this stuff that was almost poetic or artistic at times. There was one audio tape where he was being interviewed by a college radio show. They seemed like they were younger guys. I'll try to find a copy of that recording and put the name up here. And that was the first one that I listened to. And he seemed to be a little bit more rational to listen to. Some of the other interviews that he did, you could tell that he was psychotic and seemed like he would switch personalities quite often. In this interview, he sounds pretty rational. And that was the first one that I heard. And the reason I bring him up is because it seems that Rob Zombie is modeling himself after Charlie Manson. That seems to be one of his influences that he's basing his little Rob Zombie character off of. which is something like a modern day Charlie Manson. That's the act that they're doing. So I enjoyed listening to Charlie Manson tell you about, the 60s, about how kids were rebelling against the government, about how they would figure out how to rebel against the government. For example, they would go and see a construction company in the process of cutting down all of these wonderful trees that was actually a redwood park. And they would go try to stop them by sabotaging their construction equipment. This is something that a group of young, dumb kids would do. So he was kind of amusing to me. But as I get older, I could tell that there is a very dark side to Charlie Manson. He's a victim of MK Ultra. He has multi-personality disorder. A bunch of people wound up dead that he knew. The people that he was hanging out with ended up killing a bunch of people in a very brutal, terrible way. So this is the sort of thing that seems to appeal to Rob Zombie. Not the philosophy of Charlie Manson, not the anti-establishment viewpoint of Charlie Manson, but the gritty details of these murders. So that seems to be a big influence on Rob Zombie's House of 1,000 Corpses, which is there's this group of rednecks consisting of a bunch of freaks living out in a farmhouse, and they like to abduct young people who get lost or their car breaks down, and they get them to go back to their ranch where they're then hunted, victimized, and apparently, I guess, mutilated, and then their remains are left out on display as some sort of spectacle. So this suggests that Rob Zombie is he takes part in some of these occult killings. I've done a series of investigations into quite a few different areas in the New Hampshire area. And one of those investigations focuses on a town called Hillsborough, New Hampshire. And it is located right next to the state capital of Concord, New Hampshire. And it is obvious when you look at that documentary, that town is inhabited by psychotics. That town has been taken over by a group of establishment psychotics that I believe are connected to the British and the United States military's MK Ultra program. So part of that investigation focuses on these businesses that seem to feature artwork. They do art shows. They do some sort of art exhibits. And I think they mentioned that they were aligned, they were connected to a group of artists who happened to be mentally retarded. So for some reason, these people in Hillsborough, who are most likely well off, will be interested in looking at artwork or promoting the artwork done by people who are severely mentally retarded. So looking at this entire area of Hillsborough, New Hampshire, I think that this is being done for criminal and sick reasons. So if you want to get an idea of what some of these art shows may be like, you could take a look at one of their favorite guys in Hollywood, Rob Zombie, and you could see what he makes movies about, which is a group of sickos abducting high school kids and young people that are driving across the country and then torturing them mutilating them, and then leaving their bodies out on display as some sort of sick artistic exhibit. So it's pretty interesting that Rob Zombie has all these other different identities. He's also a famous reporter on 60 Minutes. So could you imagine getting your news from a guy like Anderson Cooper from 60 Minutes, and then to find out that this guy is also writing movies called House of a Thousand Corpses about abducting high school kids, torturing them, mutilating them, and then leaving their bodies out on display. Rob Zombie's crew here, they're made out to be some sort of heroes. They're some sort of anti-establishment, anti-police rebels that occupy a ranch somewhere. Because I think at the beginning of part 2, they go to arrest them. They go to raid the ranch. And Rob Zombie's crew here, they have a shootout with the cops. And then they manage to escape. And they go on the run. And while they are on their run, they abduct and kill more people. So this is something that the establishment promotes. The career of Jeff Burks, also known as Anderson Cooper, also known as several other famous actors. They can't give this guy enough roles. They can't put this guy in enough movies. They can't paint this guy as a bigger tough guy. The establishment loves Rob Zombie. If your kids want to go out and see a film, want to go out with their friends and go see a film one weekend, they could go out and get a slice of pizza and then head over and watch a Rob Zombie House of a Thousand Corpses movie that talks about abducting high school kids and mutilating them and leaving their bodies out on display as some sort of art exhibit. So I hate to use movies to establish a point because they are fictional movies. Supposedly they are made up. So I do not like to say this is what's happening because I've seen it in a movie. But this is what the establishment is into. This is their interest. They are interested in murder, death, and decay. I have Netflix now. And Netflix is something like cable where you get thousands of movies that you could select and watch whenever you want. And the entire Netflix is comprised of murder films, horror, serial killer documentaries. You know how they have different categories like drama, science fiction, romance, classics. It doesn't matter what category you go to. It looks like it has one category, and that is horror. It looks like every movie made available, every other movie made available on Netflix has something to do with zombies or serial killers or murders. It looks like that is the only thing that's made available for people these days, are these sick films. And the reason for that is because this is what your establishment is into. This is what they want to program you with. This is what they want you to see as normal. Because their people, their supposed intelligence, are comprised of extremely sick people who are into military actions, murders, organized crime, death, and decay. That's what they learn to do in the military, is kill people. And they find the people that are really into that. They find the people that are fascinated with death. They could be called necrophile. They are in love with death. That is the meaning of life to these people. So Anderson Cooper, also known as Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, is one of their key agents. I think Anderson Cooper just wrote a book about his family, about the Vanderbilts, very wealthy old family. So the Vanderbilts produce offspring like Rob Zombie. And you can take a look at the Rob Zombie music and the Rob Zombie films to see what the establishment likes to support. You could see the type of films that they like to produce for your children, for the younger generations and your children. This is the type of stuff that they want your children to see. These are the sort of themes they want to introduce to your children in the arts and entertainment. So this guy, Rob Zombie, is the product of the Vanderbilts. This is what the Vanderbilts produce. So I know a little bit about Jeff Burks. So I was born in 1975, and Jeff Burks was born around 1965. All of his different identities have different birth dates, but they're all around 1965. So he was about 10 years older than me. So the sick part about that is that he was introduced to me. He walked up to me on our block when I was a 15-year-old kid, and he introduced himself as Jeff and said that he was also 15 years old, when in fact he was in his mid-20s, when in fact he was around 25 years old. So this is what the Vanderbilts and the criminal establishment is into. This is what these rich elitists are into, is to take their 25-year-old men who just graduated college and have them dress up like a little 15-year-old kid and hang out with your 15-year-old son or daughter. So Rob Zombie, also known as Jeff Burks, he was a homosexual. He was a closet homosexual. And he gave me that impression a few different times. At one point, he almost started to hit on me. His parents had a hot tub on their deck, so we went and got into the hot tub. And I remember on one night, he kept on trying to sit right next to me, and he kept on staring at me and making this strange gesture with his mouth. He was trying to act like he was joking around. He tried to act a little bit like an idiot, but he was doing a gesture with his mouth like he was sucking on something. So I think I told him to sit across from me, or I kind of moved away from him and looked at him funny. But this is how these pedophiles end up molesting kids. There was no reason why this 25-year-old man who just got out of college should be hanging out with a 15-year-old kid. So it's real easy for this guy to offer you something to drink, offer you something to eat, and drug you. And when you fall asleep, him and his group, him and his family, him and his secret society, whatever club he's a part of, could then molest the kid. They could also get your kid abducted in that way. And then when the cops come to question little 15-year-old Jeff Burks, they're really talking to 25-year-old Anderson Cooper, who just graduated from college. And this little Vanderbilt has been trained by the family attorney about just what to say to the cops, or just what to say to the parents of the kid who went missing. So these people are very dangerous. The Vanderbilts are very dangerous people. And they like to produce Rob Zombie films about a group of sick serial killers that like to go around abducting and killing people. So Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, when he was younger, he looked a little bit different. This guy Rob Zombie, I think he's gotten extensive plastic surgery on his face. It's called augmentation. They've inserted silicone cheekbones. They've changed his forehead. He's had chin augmentation, cheekbone augmentation, forehead augmentation, eye orbit augmentation. They have basically restructured his whole face using silicone implants because he has wanted to change how he looks. He looked a little bit different when he was younger. I guess that they also do this when they start to get older. They just don't want to get facelifts anymore. They want to put these silicone implants in their face to add features. They want higher cheekbones. They want larger chins. They want higher foreheads. So they're completely restructuring their faces as they get older. So if this guy was born in 1965, he's getting up there. It is almost 2023. And if you look at him, I don't know, what would you guess? He's in his late 40s. So when he was younger, he was extremely pale. And he had really fine hair. It was so fine that it looked like he was going bald. It looked like it was very thin, almost as if you could see through it right to his scalp. It looked like hair loss was some sort of genetic factor to his family. He was also very pale, to the point that he almost looked like an albino. He also had very pale blue eyes, and he was a very short individual. At 25 years old, he looked like a 15-year-old boy. He was skinny. He was pretty short. This 25-year-old man would fit in with any group of ninth graders in high school. So these are traits. These are genetic traits that come from these families, like the Vanderbilts. For some reason, they are having genetic problems. That is why they like their plastic surgery, especially when they get older. If they do not look unusual enough when they are very young, they start to look that way when they get older. And many of them need plastic surgery so that they don't begin to look very unusual. And I believe that the reason for this is due to incest. I believe that families like the Vanderbilts and the Bushes and all of these big names of very powerful families, very wealthy and powerful families, like the DuPonts and the Reynolds and the Astors and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Bowers and the Carnegies and the Harrimans. I believe that all of these families are tied into these so-called old noble families from England and other parts of Europe. I'm losing my voice, excuse me. All these big names of these old and extremely wealthy families that you hear about. One, they are always tied to Europe. The countries like England, they are mostly tied to English families. And in these families, they all practice incest. They practice child abuse. This is what is encouraged in these families. This is how they place their young people under mind control. It's called ritual abuse. It is sexual abuse. This is how they program the young members in their family to grow up and have a disturbed view on the world, and then take part in these war crimes, and take part in these ritualistic crimes, organized crime. They take part in these abductions that they do for human trafficking and organized murder that they do for entertainment. If some kid catches their eye, if some kid that comes from a regular family attends one of their boarding schools and he looks pretty cute, the Bushes or the Vanderbilts or the Bowers or the Rothschilds, they might make up their mind to attempt to abduct that kid so that they could all rape him and then kill him. And so of course they'll send their little Rob Zombie, their little Anderson Cooper at 25 or 30 years old to act like a high school kid, to befriend your son or daughter, and then say, why don't you come hang out with me this weekend? Why don't you come sleep over my house? We're planning a ski trip. We're planning a weekend trip. Why don't you come hang out with the Vanderbilts? Only they won't call themselves a Vanderbilt. They won't call themselves Anderson Cooper. They'll say their name is Jeff Burks. So this is what these families of pedophiles have done for centuries. This is why they love war so much. Because they could get away with 100 times, 1,000 times more of these crimes. 1,000 times as many abductions and murders and rape. It seems that this may be where they all get a taste for it, is through the military. This is where they can get away with it the most, under the guise of war. This is how they could go, abduct a whole family of law-abiding citizens and do whatever they want to that family and get away with it by saying that family was some sort of terrorist unit or some group of enemy soldiers in some village somewhere, in some neighborhood, in your hometown, in America. And if you want to know what they're into, if you want to know what the Vanderbilts are into, just look at one of their sons, Anderson Cooper, also known as Rob Zombie. Just look at his films. Look at what this guy likes making films about. So if you look at the Rob Zombie films, they have this Charlie Manson figure, I guess. He's supposed to be this strong, kind of wiry, muscular, long-haired redneck who is a serial killer. And he likes hanging out with his sister named Baby. And Baby is this hot blonde with blue eyes and long hair and has a model's body. She just couldn't get more hot. And she likes hanging out with her brother to the point that they are almost like dating. That seems to be what is implied in the Rob Zombie movies. So in one scene, the redneck stud brings his hot sister to a place called Red Hot Pussy Liquors. It's a liquor store that also sells something like pornography, I guess. And they want to make fun of the manager of that store, who is behind the counter with a name tag that says Goober. So he is a dork. He is kind of nerdy looking. And so the redneck, the really cool redneck, and his real hot girlfriend, his real hot sister, his baby sister, kind of go in and mess with the dork behind the counter. So this redneck stud and his hot blonde girlfriend are just the biggest studs in their little inbred community. That is where they are going to get away with all of these abductions and murders, is for the British and the US military to put a bunch of their people in a rural area. So you got a whole area of goobers here. And then you have this elite cast of inbreds. And they like to go to the liquor store / adult film store, sex store, together for whatever reason. And then go pick on their fellow members of their secret society, their fellow inbreds of this rural community. So these guys represent the Vanderbilts, if you will. These two represent the main characters, the heroes of Rob Zombie's movie. I think Rob Zombie is envisioning himself by writing characters such as Otis here, and Otis's girlfriend / baby sister. So I don't know where this is supposed to take place. In Texas, down south, or maybe in New Hampshire, up north. This same activity happens all throughout the state of New Hampshire and Vermont. The English government, through secret societies like the Oddfellows and the Freemasons, have taken over, I think, the entire state of New Hampshire. As you know, New Hampshire is big in politics. I guess the primaries are handled here. Whatever happens in New Hampshire seems to affect who gets voted in. So New Hampshire is a big state in politics. And if you look at the different investigative documentaries all throughout my channel, you're going to see that New Hampshire is occupied by a race of extremely sick people. Something is not right with the state of New Hampshire. Every one of these investigations has at least one or two big clues that will begin to paint a picture about how sick your establishment is, being run by families like the Bushes, who are connected to the Sununu's, our Governor Chris Sununu, and families like the Vanderbilts with their little prodigy, Rob Zombie. So when I was 15 years old and I hung out with Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, he looked more like this. Here's a photograph of Rob Zombie, also known as Jeff Burks, and he's dressed up in drag. I think he's going out of his way to look like a young woman named Jill Treadwell. So Jill Treadwell was his sister's friend. Jeff Burks had a sister named Ginny Burks. And Ginny Burks was also a bit unusual looking when I met them in 1990. I'm going to guess they were in their mid-20s. So Ginny Burks was also very pale. I think that they were something like albinos, and they were both very small. They were both close to 5 feet tall. They were like 120 pounds. And Ginny Burks had long blonde hair that was also very thin. And at some point she cut it so that it was extremely short. And the unusual thing about Ginny Burks was that one of her eyes was blue and the other one was brown. They had some sort of genetic problem, and quite often they would act unusual. Quite often, Jeff Burks, also known as Anderson Cooper, also known as Rob Zombie, he would act in a way that suggested he had some sort of mental illness. He would act as if something was wrong with him. And to explain that, it was kind of the way he carried himself. It was the gestures that he would make. It was the expression on his face. At times, if he would get confused or agitated about something, it would come out more. So he looked mentally impaired at times. And so what they do with these kids is that through the MK Ultra program, they make them feel unusual. I think many of them get molested. I think many of them might pick up on the fact that they are the products of incest. Their parents may have been related. Their parents may have been cousins. Their parents may have been half-brother and half-sister. Their parents may have even been siblings. And they get molested by people in their own family and by people in their community. Because once again, they put all of their people into certain areas where the teachers are involved in this. The principal, the school principal, is involved in this. Every cop and police chief is involved in this. The fire department is involved in this. All of their neighbors are involved in this. And this is a secret society like the Oddfellows or the Freemasons that are controlled by the military, the British military and the United States military through programs like MK Ultra. And they control whole areas. They especially like rural areas. So New Hampshire is one of the worst states that I know about. To name a couple more, New Jersey is one of them, being located right next to New York City, but being rural in much of New Jersey. Also, Florida. So I think Jeff Burks, also known as Anderson Cooper, also known as Rob Zombie, they become depressed. They develop a sick outlook on the world, a very negative outlook on the world. They feel awkward. They feel weird about themselves. And this is mostly due to the abuse, to the sexual abuse that they all go through. And due to all of this sexual abuse that is happening in areas where all their people are housed, one of the results of this is incest, is inbreeding. That is why people have heard rumors about noble families being involved in inbreeding and incest. And they say that these rich people are so greedy that they want to have their young dukes, their young barons, their young nobles, their young knights. They want them to marry their cousins to keep the money in the family. That's how greedy they are. So that is a program that they're all placed under that goes back into ancient times. That's why you hear of the ancient and accepted order of Freemasons, or the Shriners, or the ancient and accepted order of the Elks Club, whatever they call their secret society. These things are old. And these practices of the elite participating in organized crime and war and occult crimes and religious occult crimes goes back into ancient times. It goes back to the dawn of man. Their practices are very primitive. Their practices are very barbaric. And this is what these noble families are into. This is what is accepted in their families. They encourage incest. If this is what is practiced by the parents, this is what the kids get introduced to. So it's intergenerational. And the inconvenient truth is that this is a program by the aliens. The aliens know how to create a race of angry misfits that have psychological problems, that have intelligence problems, and the only thing they want to do is go around and create chaos in the world so that they could hurt people and control people and feel better about themselves. This is what works best. A race of elitists, a race of inbreds that have psychological problems. They have genetic problems. They are slightly mentally retarded, and their only goal is to take it out on regular people so that they can feel better about themselves.
Shamley, a Gulf War veteran and Army reservist, had paralleled Bill's quest for answers. The two met at a research conference Doyle had been arranging, and soon the two became tight research allies. Doyle would eventually leave the reserve and join Bill in Arizona to conduct full-time research up until Bill's death.
Then he realized his research at the time was heavily with Lars Hansen and many of them in the UFO realm. And he realized that most of them, and a lot of them upon admittal, and I have the documents, admitted to working for, either in the past or still being on CIA payroll. Essentially, by July 98, I was moved here with Bill to conduct full-time research into the mystery schools and secret societies and the government protocols in general.
So the last thing I want to add, I think I'm running out of time here with the battery on the camera. But the last thing I want to add is that Jeff Burks, also known as Anderson Cooper, also known as Rob Zombie, is also identified to be Mike Diana. So Mike Diana is the creator of an extremely sick comic book called Boiled Angel. And I first became aware of that by doing research on Henry Lee Lucas. I always wondered why certain people became serial killers. I was trying to figure out different correlations between them. Since I was young, I figured out that serial killers seemed to become popular around the same time. I also noticed that a lot of them were homosexuals. These are different correlations that I found between the serial killers. So I was doing research on Henry Lee Lucas, and I saw that there was an interview in a magazine called Boiled Angel, and it had to do with Henry Lee Lucas's partner, his crime partner, called Otis Toole. So that interview of Otis Toole is some of the most disturbing things that I've read on the internet. And in that interview, you have a serial killer describing what he does after abducting people, after abducting children. This is what he is going to do to them. So that is some of the most disturbing things that I've read on the internet. And the interviewer is somebody named Billy Bob. So the camera ran out of batteries before. So Jeff Burks has been identified as a guy named Mike Diana. And Mike Diana is the creator of a very sick comic book called Boiled Angel. And the artwork in Boiled Angel is very much like the artwork that were on Rob Zombie videos that I saw around the mid to late 1990s. So like I said, I first became aware of Boiled Angel when I was doing research on Henry Lee Lucas, who was a serial killer. And his partner was a man named Otis Toole. And there's an interview in Boiled Angel number 8, and it's entitled An Interview with Otis Toole, the Cannibal Kid. And the person interviewing Otis Toole is a guy named Billy Bob Barton. And I think that is Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, also known as Mike Diana. So before we go into detail about how Rob Zombie would know Otis Toole and be able to interview him, I want to describe some of the artwork that Mike Diana creates and he puts in this comic book called Boiled Angel. So if I were to include some of these drawings by Mike Diana, I think that it would be grounds for taking the video down. These cartoons contain the worst images concerning sex and violence and pedophilia that I've ever seen. So I'm going to describe some of these drawings. If you go to Google Images and you do a search for Mike Diana, Boiled Angel, some of these images may come up. The first image that I'm going to describe of a drawing done by Mike Diana, there is a naked man and he is sexually aroused and he is cutting a woman's chest and stomach open and he is removing a baby that is connected to her by an umbilical cord. The next image is a figure of an angel and he has a halo and he has wings and his arms and his legs have been severed off and there's 3 purple devils who are all masturbating and climaxing on this individual with a halo and angel wings. The next is a cartoon advertisement of sorts, and on the top of the page it says Baked Baby Jesus, and underneath that is a devil head, and then it says underneath that First Time on DVD by Mike Diana. The next cartoon also has a large title that says Fire Brat, and there is a approximately 3-year-old boy getting burned. So you see this arm extending into the drawing and the hand is holding a propane torch. And so this individual that you cannot see is burning this 3-year-old boy with a propane torch. The next is another drawing that says Baked Baby Jesus, and there's many images including a burning American flag and a Christ on a crucifix who is being ejaculated on by a penis, by a detached penis. And that piece of artwork is signed Mike Diana 17. So I guess that was done in 2017. The next is a muscular guy and he has horns on his head and he is holding the severed head of Jesus Christ and he's performing fellatio with the severed head of Jesus Christ. And this devil guy is also holding Jesus Christ's severed penis. And there is a description on the bottom of the page that says, quote, "Our Lord Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, suffering a bitter agony for our sins." And that is the garden where Jesus Christ was betrayed by his disciples. The next drawing appears to be a severely burned child with a hairspray can that says "Do Right," and it's spelled R-I-T-E, like religious right. And on the other side of the severely burned child is a candle. So this implies that they're using the candle to ignite the hairspray and severely burn a child. So it looks like the kids on TV who have been caught in a house fire and they're completely disfigured. And it's signed Mike Diana 99. The next is a young boy with his eyes cut out, and he is jumping rope along a walkway that is covered with thumbtacks. The next drawing is a newborn baby on a platter with a knife stabbed into his back and a large mayo jar next to it. And there is a list of titles, and they say Second Coming, Babyland, Electric Fire, Abortion Rally, Sleazy Love, Daisy Licks Jesus, Desecration, Shooting, and Parking Lot. So this implies that these are events at some type of show. The next is a cartoon of what appears to be a man raping and killing a little girl at a playground. And this playground is right next to a church, a Christian church. The next one is of what appears to be a 10-year-old boy, and he is crucifying what appears to be a premature baby to a cross. The next cartoon is entitled Rape Dungeon, where there is a man who is covered in what looks like piercings. He has hundreds of nails and pins driven into his skin, like he is addicted to piercings. And this guy is torturing and dismembering several babies or little people. The next cartoon says Juicy Fetus and shows two young children appearing to drink the blood out of a premature baby or fetus. And it's signed Mike Diana 2020. The next cartoon is of a guy holding a baby above a large pot of boiling water. And the killer is also boiling butter in a smaller pot next to the larger one. And I guess that this implies that this is some type of cooking recipe. All of this artwork that focuses on pedophilia, attacking little kids, torturing little kids, and eating little kids. This sounds exactly like what these occultists and pagans have been accused of throughout the centuries. This is what Mike Diana's good buddy, Otis Toole, is talking about in the interview in number 8 of Boiled Angel. So I believe that these drawings should be classified as hate speech. This is the same thing as hate speech. I do not know the religion of Jeff Burks, also known as Mike Diana, also known as Rob Zombie, but this is anti-Christian artwork. There is one image after the next showing people doing terrible things to Jesus Christ. If artwork was done like this, that was focused on attacking Jewish religious figures, it would be classified as anti-Semitic and hate speech. So I believe that this too should be known as anti-Christian and hate speech. So I really do not know why there would be such hatred directed toward Jesus Christ. If you read the New Testament about Jesus Christ, he goes around attempting to teach people, and then he gets arrested, tortured, and crucified by the Roman army. So I do not know what part of the New Testament would incur people's wrath Why is Mike Diana, also known as Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, why does he hate Jesus Christ? In my opinion, Jesus Christ got beat up and crucified in the New Testament. Why on earth would you want to do artwork based on doing something even worse to Jesus Christ concerning sex and violence? This suggests that Rob Zombie is a very sick individual. So once again, I think Billy Bob Barton is another alias of Mike Diana, also known as Rob Zombie, also known as Anderson Cooper, also known as Jeff Burks, and for some reason he knows Otis Toole. So there is a very important documentary that I did, and it is called Ed Harris and the Monarch Program, and that is part 1. And part 2 is called Monarch Program Exposed. And in both of those videos, I mentioned Otis Toole, who is also known as the famous actor named Ed Harris. Ed Harris is another Rob Zombie type character that has many different aliases, and he's involved in the MK Ultra program. And he is involved in occult crime concerning cannibalism, concerning human sacrifice, concerning pedophilia. So Otis Toole was arrested, and at some point he was released from prison, and he acts as Ed Harris in Hollywood. So I think Rob Zombie, also known as Jeff Burks, is just like Ed Harris. These people involved in this get arrested for all sorts of crimes. All of these serial killers that get arrested seem to be released from prison, and they go about living their lives under different aliases. And many of them are famous. They're actors, they're politicians, because this is the sort of people that they want in the establishment. These are the sort of people that they promote in the military establishment. So for more information about Otis Toole, also known as Ed Harris, please see the documentaries that I did entitled Ed Harris and the Monarch Program, which is part 1. And part 2 is the Monarch Program Exposed. So in that documentary, I discuss Ed Harris, also known as Otis Toole, and the names that he uses in New Milford, Connecticut. He uses the name Dennis Witzke and also Zeke Cable. I believe that he also uses the name Zeke Cable. So Jeff Burks, also known as Mike Diana, also known as Rob Zombie, is also from New Milford, Connecticut. So we probably interviewed his fellow actor, his fellow cult member, about what he knew about life in their pedophile death cult. And that became the interview with Otis Toole, the Cannibal Kid. So if you fast forward to about 1 hour into Ed Harris and the Monarch Program, I discuss an individual known as Jim Pace. This guy became my mother's boyfriend. He acted as a fellow teacher where she worked at Danbury High School. So he is identified to also be the actor known as Jeffrey DeMunn, and he is connected to Ed Harris. So please see Ed Harris and the Monarch Program, which is part 1, and then Monarch Program Exposed, which is part 2. So Jim Pace, also known as Jeffrey DeMunn, is also connected to Rob Zombie, and this is very important. So I'll try to explain this as easily as I can. So Jim Pace, also known as Jeffrey DeMunn, he has 3 children. He has 2 sons and 1 daughter, and one of his sons is named Chris Pace. And I've never met Chris Pace, and I've only seen 1 photograph of Chris Pace. So I got this from my mother. It is not too clear. I think she took it with her cell phone. And it is of Jim Pace, also known as Jeffrey DeMunn, photographed with his son, Chris Pace. So after looking at this appears to be Jeff Burks once again. This appears to be Rob Zombie. So this is Rob Zombie photographed with Jeffrey D. Munn. So Jim Pace has two sons. I forget the other one's name, but his daughter's name is Robin Pace. And Robin Pace is another actor. And she is identified to be Hilary Swank. So supposedly, Robin Pace, also known as Hilary Swank, has one son with her husband. I forget her husband's name. But I believe that they had their son around 2012. So around 2016, I was visiting my mother in Danbury, Connecticut, when she was staying over at Jim Pace's house at his condominium. And I remember seeing a photograph of a kid about 4 years old. And this was his grandson. This was his daughter's son. This was Robin Pace's son. And he looked exactly like Jeff Burks. It looked like a little Jeff Burks. So this was back in 2016. So I thought it was pretty funny that Robin Pace would have a kid that looks exactly like an old friend of mine named Jeff Burks. So this is a picture of Jeff Burks. I found this on the internet. I think I found this on Facebook. And it had a name like John Smith. So if you compare Jeff Burks to Robin Pace, So Robin Pace, she was first introduced to me as a Leah Rafalco. She was the girlfriend of Josh Medina, also known as David Chappelle.
You would back me up?
Yeah.
And why?
Just for fun and barbarians.
You like fights?
I like this.
So in MK Ultra, they have these agents, they have these professional actors that come from very wealthy families, and they are all involved in occult crimes. They get off on that. They get off on the notoriety. They get off on one of their identities are serial killers. They get off on the fact that some of their identities are satanic rock stars. So once you get these people in your life, they become stalkers, and they'll introduce themselves over and over again under different names. So she was first introduced to me as Leah Rafalco, who was David Chappelle's girlfriend. And then later on, after my mother met Jim Pace, also known as Jeffrey DeMunn, Leah Rafalco, also known as Hilary Swank, the actress Hilary Swank, was reintroduced as a Robin Pace. That is how much the MK Ultra establishment likes Leah Rafalco, likes Hilary Swank. They always want this woman somehow associated with me or my family. My guess is because she's pretty bad. So I think it was on Josh Medina's Facebook page. Dave Chappelle goes by Josh Medina because he doesn't want anyone to know who he is. So one of his aliases is Josh Medina. So Josh Medina was friends with a person called Robert Rafalco, and he was photographed with him a few times. And I think I left a comment on Josh Medina's Facebook page, and Josh Medina replied, and I said, "Who are you hanging out with? Is that Mark Zuckerberg?" Because I didn't recognize who he was at first. And Josh Medina responds, and he says, "No, that's Robert Rafalco. That's Leah's brother." So Robert Rafalco, this is Mike Diana, this is Rob Zombie, this is Jeff Burks, and once again, he's identified as Leah Rafalco's brother. here, he says his name is Chris Pace, and he's Robin Pace's brother. So over here, this is Robert Rafalco, Leah's brother. So Robin Pace is the same person as Leah Rafalco. So that's 2 times that they're equating that Jeff Burks is the brother of Robin Pace, also known as Leah Rafalco. So to simplify it, Rob Zombie is related to Hilary Swank, and when Hilary Swank has a son, it looks exactly like her brother. So my guess is this child might be the result of incest between them. Just take a look at Mike Diana's artwork, where he focuses on pedophilia and cannibalism and cutting apart and raping Jesus Christ. That's the type of stuff that Rob Zombie is into. Rob Zombie is also familiar with Otis Toole. He gets to interview Otis Toole. Otis Toole is identified as Dennis Witzke, who was from New Milford, Connecticut, the same as Jeff Burks. So these 2 guys, Otis Toole and Rob Zombie, are both from New Milford, Connecticut. That may be where they met, in the same town that they both live in. They met at the Oddfellows Lodge. They are possibly even related because there is a connection between Ed Harris, also known as Otis Toole, Jeffrey DeMunn, also known as Jim Pace, Scott Wilson, also known as Richie Pace, and Richard Dreyfuss. So these guys are probably all related. Ed Harris, Jeffrey DeMunn, Scott Wilson, Richard Dreyfuss, Rob Zombie, and Hilary Swank. And they are involved in MK Ultra. They are involved in satanic ritual abuse and occult crimes. And I think that all of these families are involved with incest. They produce children through incest. That is their practice. That is how Jeff Burks, also known as Rob Zombie, and his sister, Jenny Burks, acted when they were young. That is the way they seemed when they were young. They looked like they were somewhat albinos. They were very short and frail. Jeff Burks' hair was so thin, it looked like he was going bald. Back in the early 90s, I guess when he was around 25 years old. His skin was so pale, you could see the veins in his skin. His sister had one brown eye and one blue eye, and they had unusual mannerisms that suggested something was wrong with them. I guess when Jeff would act stressed out or confused, he looked like he had a mental disability. And Jeff and his sister Jenny Burks, they looked like clones of each other. They looked like twins or something. Even though one was a female and one was a male, they looked very much alike, like they were part of some cloning program. So I would not be surprised if Robin Pace was Jeff Burke's sister, but they are still producing children together because there are too many links that suggest this. So I do not want to repeat a lot of information that was covered in Ed Harris and the Monarch program, which is part 1. And part 2 is the Monarch program exposed. But in that video, I discuss the relation between Ed Harris, Jim Pace, also known as Jeffrey DeMunn, and Scott Wilson, also known as Richie Pace, who acted as Jim Pace's brother. So what these actors do is when they get one of their agents close to you, they can groom 2 or 3 different men to all act as the same person. So I think that Richie Pace was a few different men. One was the actor known as Scott Wilson, and another is Richard Dreyfuss. So Jeffrey DeMunn was in a very disturbed movie called Citizen X about a serial killer from Russia who murders children. And that is the only movie that I remember Jeffrey DeMunn acting in. I looked at the list on Wikipedia and I did not recognize too many other movies. So what I know about the MK Ultra program is that they'll have these actors act under many different names. And a lot of these guys are extremely successful. They're extremely wealthy. So I think that Jim Pace is not only Jeffrey DeMunn, but he also acted as Robert De Niro. I think he acted as Robert De Niro in the movie Taxi Driver. That was one of the movies that he acted as Robert De Niro in, was Taxi Driver.